We're happy to have Mike Berkley giving our presentation tonight. Mike and Terry Barnes started GroWild in 1997. It's one of the largest wholesale suppliers of native plants in the Southeast for commercial and residential projects. And they're also open by appointment only for retail sales. Mike is the recipient of the Tom Dodd Jr. Award from the Callaway Native Plant Conference, and also the Club Horticulture Commendation Award from the Garden Club of America. Mike was on the cover of the American Nurseryman, so he's definitely a respected person in the trade. He's done projects over at the Presidential Center over in Arkansas, I believe, for green roofs. He's done lots of projects for installation in addition to growing plants. And with John McGee and Jesse Turner, who will be our speaker next month, Mike created and started the Native Plant Podcast. As an outgrowth of that podcast, Mike is writing a book for Timber Press on the best beer to pair with each of the popular native plants. So with that, I will turn it over to Mike, who's going to tell us about pocket prairies.
Thank you, Bill. We started in 1997. Wow, man, I'm getting old. Thank you, Bill. I want just a quick story about Bill. So a few weeks ago, when Bill approached me about doing this presentation, I said, "Oh gosh, preaching to the choir for the Tennessee Valley chapter." "Oh, absolutely, you count me in." So I thought, well, I better save his phone number in my phone and put his name in, and I misspelled I said Bull. So he is forever known now as Bull Mole. And you guys down there in Chattanooga at the Tennessee Valley chapter know him well enough to say, yeah, he's Bull Mole. Bill, I have to say, was very instrumental in getting our chapter up here in Middle Tennessee, going to Middle Tennessee Valley, Middle Tennessee chapter. He took his own time, or his time, made time for us to come up and show us how to get it started and everything. And for that, we are very indebted to Bull Mole. So thank you, Bull. We're going to get started on this today. And again, it's, I feel this is kind of weird because I'm giving a talk to a bunch of people that already get it, and I have to give talks to a lot of groups. I just got invited to give a talk to the Rose Society up here. I've given talks to the Hossa Society. And with those guys, I'm trying to swing them over. You guys are already over. So we'll see if I can't show you something a little different when we start talking about these prairies. So just to start off, a couple of months ago, Terry and I took a trip out to Colorado, and on our way back, we stopped at the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve. It's Nature Conservancy bought the land, National Park Service took it over. It is just a very cool tallgrass prairie right in the middle of Kansas. And if anybody that knows Kansas, there's very few trees there. There's a lot of wind, very flat. It just bothered me a little bit since I live up here on these ridges, west of Nashville. But just beautiful prairies. And I want to point out that what you see in this photo, the vistas beyond, is not prairies, but it's pasture land. And so that's what's happened, is just in the past couple of centuries, we've lost so much of the original prairies. And in the visitor center, something stood out to me, and one of the rangers made note of it as well, is that what we were seeing of this vast prairie there in Kansas was only 4% of the original prairies. And that just hit me hard. Now, I build prairies. I've done some large acres and acres of prairies. And when you do something like that, you've got the special machinery, you've got a seed drill, and you're sowing, pounds and pounds and pounds of seed to build these native plant prairies. And of course, the fun part, and we get to burn ours, our prairie. We have about 30 something acres of prairie here. And when we burn every 3 years, which by the way, we're going to do it this next spring. Oh, it's, I've always said there's a little pyro in all of us, and we get to have fun with this, and we get volunteers come out, and, it's just part of the maintenance. And you'll smell like smoke. You'll have a red face because of the heat coming from these flames, and then you're grinning at the end of the day. But this has been for decades our idea, especially in suburbia, urban suburbia, our ideas of grasslands. This is our turf grass, and I'm born and raised in Nashville, and I can't imagine not having turf grass back then. And what do I play football on? What do I, play with a dog on? So it's turf grass. And we had in suburbia turf grass, turf grass, turf grass, acres and acres of the turf grass. Okay. And then, we would see things like this. We have stuff like this, that's just, probably the most sterile entity in this whole landscape is right there in the foreground is that turf grass, and just, even the style of what we did for decades, it's like this. Well, but thanks to Wild Ones and many other groups and a lot of gardeners just volunteering to make the change, we're not doing this anymore. I think one of the big things that we need to think about in turf grass is that, what do we do with it? And none of us, I mean, very few places do I go now where a client will say, well, yeah, I know I need to do away with a lot of the turf grass, but I don't want to get rid of all of it, and this is why, I think now we've come up with creative ways to do this. I don't know if we as gardeners are ready to just let things go. I have a good friend in Nashville that's retired from Metro, the Natural Division and Environment Conservation, with the state of Tennessee. And he has written out ordinances of what codes should be on your front yard. And with Metro Nashville, with the growth that we are experiencing up here, especially around Middle Tennessee, the changes that's happening is just like, okay, it's still long. A lot of people saying, well, I'm just going to let it go. And you can't do that. Codes will send you a nasty letter and possibly even slap you with a fine. So we can't do things like what you see here. Can't just let it go. Now, we are fortunate to find a lot of people that's just saying, okay, I don't want turf grass. I want some design. I want the butterflies. I want the hummingbirds. I want the pollinator garden. I want the natives, but I don't want the turf grass. And we're seeing more and more, especially in East Nashville, in the urban suburban areas, smaller lots, doing things like this. Well, what we're going to talk about today is kind of that hybrid, not a whole yard devoted to native plants like that, but not a full-blown corner-to-corner turf grass either. Okay, so in building a pocket prairie, we're going to go through some of the fine points of what I've learned over 25 years of doing this. Is what's important. Some did not work, some did great. If I could go back and redo some of those I did 20 years ago, I would. I think one of the most important points of building a pocket prairie is going to be the location. Here you see one, we paint out an orange amoeba shape. We always look at the size of it and the soil and everything before we start saying, okay, this is going to be a pocket prairie. Exposure is a big deal. If they don't have enough sun, I am not going to build a pocket prairie there. I may call it something else. Maybe it'll be a pollinator garden with less grasses. If you don't have enough sun on these prairie grasses, this is what they're going to do. They're going to flop. You can see we tried tying them up. Now this is still getting 5 hours of sun in the dead of the summer, but not enough. You really need all day sun to make these plants perform. And it is about performance. I get a lot of people calling me up, said, Mike, that planting you did years ago, it's great. It's still alive. I said, yeah, but is it performing? Well, it's flopping a little bit. It's not blooming as well. Then it's not performing. So we got to go beyond just the fact that we've got a garden in now, a new garden, a new style of garden, albeit it's been around for thousands of years. It's got to go into a performance. Here is a one that we did started on earlier a couple of years ago, and it's a very small. And I highly recommend, you know, when you start to look at your your garden, is start small and build out from there. You can always expand later. Getting it too big right off the bat is not such a good thing. And I've seen some crash and burn. People could not maintain them because they were too big. Now, you know, a lot of these, you know, all this is a cultivated bed again, with a little less on the cultivation, but they're weed catchers. This is a size of one we did up in Charlotte, Tennessee, and the client wanted a full-blown garden there, and you can see it's a turnaround driveway around this. We put a berm inside that also so that they could walk inside it and sit up on the berm and look at their pocket prairie. So beyond the location, here comes the cleaning. You know, and I've done all kinds of cleaning. I try to work with the client and say, whatever you feel ethically and morally you want to do, I will work with you on it. However, here's the deal. Some are more efficient than others. Some are more thorough than others. Solarization, I'm getting excited about that. However, I got to have patience with that. We'll take a 6 mil black plastic and put it over the area. And we start at the beginning of the summer, and we'll not open it up till late summer to see if it's killed it back. You can get up to about 140 degrees on a hot summer day in July underneath that black plastic. So you're sterilizing. So it's not just solarizing, it's sterilizing the soil. Well, you kind of want to do that because turf grass has got an unbelievable seed bank in it. And sure, you may remove you know, the top layer of vegetation, but you've got a seed bank too. So this is really a good way, but you got to have patience with that. Doesn't always work on Bermuda. A lot of those warm season grasses that are tough as nails, you know, they have a way of making it through. They are survivalists, and Bermuda is one of the worst things that you can have encroaching back into a pocket prairie. The organics, I'm excited about the organics. It is a safe, truly safe way to kill your lawn. You know, there's all kinds of recipes that uses the vinegar and you know, and different salt and different things like that. And that is perfectly safe to use. You got to be careful with the horticultural vinegar because it will burn your skin. So safety right up front with that. So the organics is another way to safely remove chemical applications. Now, when we do large areas with the homeowners' blessings, we may use chemical applications. When we're doing acres and acres of a full-blown prairie, there's no way around it. You cannot remove or kill all of the Johnson grass, Lespedeza sericea, all the non-natives, fescue, things like that that are covering acres without the chemical applications. Not my favorite thing to do. I am very cognizant of what the you know, the controversy about the chemical applications. But when you've got a small yard and you're doing a small bed of pocket prairie, you know, there's other ways around besides using the chemical applications. When you start getting up to 2, 3, 4, 500 square feet, you got to look at this as that. And then a lot of times you got to weigh out economics in this as well. All the applications that I'm talking about right now, solarization is definitely the cheapest. Organics is a little pricey. Chemical applications can be cheap per square foot. My favorite one to do is to actually sod cutting. And here you see the guys are actually doing a sod cutting on this. And this is about 55 square feet that we're doing on this pocket prairie. And we're actually removing this, and you can actually rent these machines. We have our own machines that does the sod cutting. And what this has is it's motor blades that are shifting back and forth and actually slices below the crown of the grass and cuts that almost like carpet, and you roll it up, just like laying sod. if anybody's ever done that before, we're removing the sod just in reverse by cutting it and then rolling it up and putting it on the tarp and hauling it away. All right, so you got your location, you did your cleaning. Here comes the fun part. This is the part where you sit down and, have you a nice glass of beer and homebrew preferably, and sit down and really look at what the plants are going to put in there. And oh, here we go, the big controversy. Some of you that know me know how I feel about this. I believe, and I really, if someone comes to me and says, I'm a purist, Mike, I want straight species, I want to go as local as I can, that's great. But then I've also embracing the cultivars. And please don't say native art to me. I think that, and I gave a whole talk at Colorway years ago about the cultivars versus nativars. And by saying cultivars, you could say cultivars of hostas, not native. Cultivars of crepe myrtles, that's fine. When you say nativars, that separates us away from the mainstream. And I think right now with the native plant movement, as fast as it's growing, as large, the snowballing that's happening, it still separates us away from the mainstream. And what we want to do is blend in with those people that still like Buddleia, the butterfly bush. We want to pull them over and say, and gradually say, look, butterfly bush is an invasive non-native species. Yeah, you may have some great cultivars there, but hey, take a look at some of these cultivars. And by doing that, sometimes we may have to put a little glitter on the package. One of the big things about, very briefly, when we do our plant selection is that we want to see how low maintenance we can keep it for the new client. We get people in that don't have a clue what these native plants are, but they feel like they're going to do the right thing by doing something in their yard native. And if it happens to be a pocket prairie, sure. If you plant straight Phlox paniculata, the summer phlox, some people call garden phlox, that beautiful pink, and you put that in your full sun pocket prairie, you just might get a leaf that looks like this on the left, and that's powdery mildew. And there's been very few straight species Phlox paniculatas out in the wild that I've seen that did not have some powdery mildew. Now, yes, were they surviving? Sure. Were they performing? Maybe not. Not without, some fungicide use, which we don't want to do. What you see there on the right is the Robert Poor, which looks just about exactly like a straight Phlox paniculata, but you don't see the powdery mildew on the leaf. And I will be more apt to put these out in the full sun without irrigation because of that one reason. No fungal problems. Another question you got to ask yourself is that how local in the genotypes do I want to go? One of my favorite plants to use in any kind of landscape, actually in full sun, and I love using them in the pocket prairies, is the Salvia gregaris, the autumn sage. They're hummingbird plants big time. This plant is outstanding for us. The hummingbirds are all over it, butterflies, pollinators, bees all over it, and terrible common name, autumn sage. It blooms from May till the first frost, and who knows when that is this fall here in Nashville. It's just a performer. Well, it's not anywhere close to the state of Tennessee. It's down into Louisiana, going to East Texas and on down towards Mexico. It does great for us here. At one time, we had a winter hardiness issue, which we don't have now, but that is a great performer, and it works very well. So what you do is you make a decision. If you want to keep local genotypes, local provenance, great, I'll work with you on that. But you're going to limit yourself also to the variety and diversity. You can't go wrong with this. And I've seen forms of this all over the Eastern United States, and they're all over the place. And when we start talking about putting in a native plant garden of any kind, you can't help but talk about host plants. And we know about the monarch. In fact, I was telling somebody earlier, if you could go through the history of GroWild in the past 25 years, I remember when people came in the first 25 years ago, and it wasn't about butterflies or anything, it was about the birds. Oh, okay. Then all of a sudden, the monarch, Oh, the monarch turned us around and said, okay, it's monarch, so you got to have a host plant. Well, what is the host plant? Well, it's the milkweeds. Okay, it's Lepsis genus. Okay, oh, well then what about spicebush and what about Aristolochia for the pipeline swallowtails? And next thing you know, it's all things host plants. Then we started talking about, well, what about the bees? And that lady that used to come to me and said, don't you dare put St. John's wort in my yard because it attracts bees. I don't want my child to be stung. I don't want my puppy to be stung, you know. So I don't want anything that attracts bees. Now it's okay. Now, of course, you pay attention to Heather Home, it's all things pollinators, wasp, you know, and so now we're looking at everything, every insect, and what does that insect do for us? You know, and in many cases, it is a big pollinator for us. So this is one thing with the pocket prairies is that we're also looking at the host plants. You want to put something in there that is a food source, not just a nectar source, but food for the caterpillars. Another question you ask yourself, is it seed or is it live plants? If you're doing the seed, okay, my high recommendation, especially if you're doing a small plot in a pocket prairie, don't mix the seed up, okay? Keep the seed separate, individual species, and sow it accordingly. You're almost doing the design with it. Now, nature will take over eventually a few years down the road, and you start to see more of the mosaic and a little crossing over. There's a little bit of Darwinism with all of this, especially if you're using the seed, survival of the fittest, and some will win out. Some are weaker, will not do as well a few years down the road, but at least start off with somewhat of a design. And by the way, when you mix that seed, or if you don't, when you're not mixing the seed and you're sowing the seed, mix it with play sand. It makes it a lot easier and put it in just a regular old pull along, push along a grass seed sower. The one thing about seed is cheaper. If you say take a square foot and how many dollars you've got in on that square foot, there is no doubt about it. This is a cheaper way to go. But you need to allow 3 or more years. You know, some of the grasses, like a prairie drop seed, the Spirabolus heterolepsis that I grow, is slow as all get out. It just takes forever to get it up from seed. Therefore, we do a lot of propagation with that plant by divisions to actually get a plant going, vegetative propagation. So, you know, sometimes seed on some of these species a little slower. Well, what are you going to do in the meantime? Well, you better make sure you're doing some weed prevention because something else is going to come in there while you're waiting for these seed to establish. For large plots, no doubt about it, the best way to go. But for smaller plots, I like using the live plants. I will use anything from plugs to quarts, gallons to 3 gallons. And some of the grasses like the prairie drop seed I mentioned, it really is better to go in a 3 gallon because it is so slow and get something established quicker. Plugs, I've done thousands and thousands of plugs. I've actually done hybrids where I've used plugs and seed together, and that worked out really well, especially if I'm doing some kind of a filler plant in between some of these around these seeds. Quarts, you can get a lot of great warm season grasses in quarts and as well as in gallons. What this does, it does speed up the process. You know, you're talking about a design already, you know, and placing that plant where you want, you know, maybe there's a certain focal point looking out a kitchen window that you wanted to see the taller plants towards the back, the smaller plants towards the front. Your grasses are mingling in between all the other plants, all the forbs. Sure, this is part of the design and allows you to put exact placement. So if you do plugs, this is pretty much what, and this is one of the little blue stems that we grow in plugs. And, you know, you're talking about probably around $3 plus per plug. And, you know, it's relatively cheap considering what you've got going there. Very vulnerable. You got to plant these at a certain time. If you plant it in the fall, what you will have before they can root out is what we call the ice cube effect. And the ice cube effect is where it actually, the frozen ground, if we ever see that again, frozen ground will squeeze these up out of the ground and they lay on the top with their roots exposed to the cold air. And you're going to get some mortality out of that. Best time to plant the plugs will be in the spring, going into early summer. You know, these are called warm season grasses. And warm seasons grasses really need to have 70 degrees on up to really start rooting out into our soils. When it comes to the forbs and a lot of other flowering plants, gallons are really a good way to go, especially if you want to see that instant gratification of, a coneflower blooming its first year. You don't always get that off of a plug, and rarely will you get it off of a seed as well. And there's many, many 1 gallons out there to choose from. You can go to your local purveyor down there around Chattanooga. I know Avi Askey had a lot of 1 gallons he was selling back in the day at Foothills. The grasses, you can see here a lot of the grasses that we grow. You can see in the foreground there, those are 3 gallons. And the lighter tan color in the foreground, that's a spiralis, that's a prairie drop seed. And again, when I'm planting that grass in any kind of a bed, any kind of scenario, I'm going to use the 3 gallons of those because they're more established. I don't get as much mortality. One of the crazy phenomena that's happening with us in our winters now is that we're not getting that frozen temperatures like we used to. We used to get, in Middle Tennessee, it was ice storms and snow. We would have days of below freezing temperatures. It doesn't happen now. What we're getting now instead is moderate temperatures with a lot of wet. Well, with that wet, and you get these warm season grasses, you can have root rot big time, crown rot crazy. And so, we'll plant a lot of these plants, especially warm season grasses. We'll plant them high, but we're also cognizant of the size that we're going in with. A 1 or 3 gallon container is going to have a little more sustainability and survival over the plugs. And of course, the grasses, it's just a matter of waiting for those to get up in size. Okay, with the grasses and the forbs, one of the things that makes a pocket prairie, I mean, if you just put all the prairie plants out there and no grasses, you still have a part of a prairie that's more of a pollinator garden. To make it a pocket prairie, 50% or more of the grasses per the amount of forbs. I will push up around 60 to 7% of the species being grasses to make it a pocket prairie. And we want to see those grasses. My big selling points about grasses right now is that in our dead of the winter, in January, you've got static looking everything. The trees with their silhouettes great. No flowering plants up or anything like that. Evergreen, and a lot of the suburbia, but you don't have movement. And those grasses give you movement. Okay, so the more grasses you put into your pocket prairie, the more movement you're going to have, the more winter interest, in my opinion. I've come up with an idea to do about 10 species per 20 feet. Now, that means that you may do 1 or 2 of one species. You may be putting 10 of another species, but this is the number of species per 20 feet, because what we want in these pocket prairies is diversity. If you do just 1 or 2 or 3 species in that 20-foot bed, it's not very diverse. You're going to have different bloom times. You're going to have maybe even different food sources for some of these. So keep it diverse by putting the 10 species per 20 feet. If you go higher than that, and there was a big thing with some of the prairies, and of course SGI and Dr. Dwayne Estes talks about in 1 square meter how many different species in a happy, healthy, naturally occurring prairie there are. You do that, and that's great. You could do that in your pocket prairie. You could do many species per 20 feet. It starts to look a little busy, okay? And so my thing is that start off with the 10 species per 20 feet. You want to add more later. And choosing the right species. So what do I mean by the right species? Well, height, okay? So if you did big blue stem, a giant ironweed, some of the silphiums, the cup plant, the sunflowers, you're going to talk about 7, 8, 9, pushing 10 feet. Is that something you want? And if you put it way back in the back 40 and you can still see it, maybe having some tall plants back there. I love ironweed. I love the tall ironweed. That's Vernonia gigantea. I love that plant. I'm careful in putting it in a bed close to the house because you have to look up. You almost have to have binoculars to see the butterflies that's up on it in the summer. Think about your colors. Okay, different colors do different things for different insects across the board. You want, maybe it's so close to the house that a hot color doesn't work. So those bright yellows, a lot of bright yellows and hot reds, maybe you want to go with pastels. Look, you get to design this. Okay, it's going to be a great pocket prairie for you, but you get to design this. So pick out your colors. I run across clients all the time, and then one of the first things I ask them is there a color you don't like? Oh, I don't like the reds. Oh, I don't like that fuchsia pink. Oh, so I may not put Joe Pye weed in your yard. Oh, well, wait a minute, I like Joe Pye. So, consider the colors that you're using in these species. Oh yeah, you got to put the food plants out there. Okay, we already know the nectar plants are big, and we already talked about the host plants. So make sure you have diversity on the food plants. Put a few host plants in there. We did a big host plant garden in Dunbar Cave up in Clarksville, Tennessee years ago. And I worked with a guy with state parks at the time that was big on host plants. We put in a native plantain. If you know what that is, Platego, it's a lawn weed, basically, and most of the Plategos that are out there are not native. There's a European Platego. We actually put that in because it was a host plant for a particular moth. So, I think that pretty much everything that I grow is a host plant, it's a food plant. So consider all the food plants. Your bloom time, if you've got all the asters in your garden, okay, then you're not going to have anything up front for those bees to feed on right up front. One of the things I like about a red bud, even though I wouldn't put it necessarily in a pocket prairie, is the bees go to it early in April, sometimes in late March, and they're feeding right now. So they're on that. So if you put all your asters in, or you put all your spring blooming in, consider your bloom time through the summer. That's where the diversity comes in. And a big one for me, consider the aggressiveness of this native plant. When we talk about aggressiveness, a lot of times it's about an invasive non-native species. Kudzu's aggressive. Privet's aggressive. The bush honeysuckle is aggressive. The microstegium, the Japanese stiltgrass, so aggressive in our shady woodland areas. But aggressiveness for the native plants, that's something to think about. And here's a couple that would surprise a lot of people about the aggressiveness, is that Saccharum giganteum, and all the Saccharums actually, but particularly the giganteum, is a very aggressive grass. I love this grass. And, if I could put it in the perfect spot and it not reseed itself all over the kingdom, that would be great. It towers up high. It gets, while it's in bloom, and what you're seeing here is the seed head. When it gets up tall and blooming, it has a kind of a copper color to the bloom. When the wind is blowing, those plumes are jumping around, dancing on those long stilts. It's a fantastic, beautiful grass, but it's aggressive. Okay, and red switchgrass. I have seen red switchgrass in some natural prairie areas where it was almost monoculture, and there was nothing but Panicum brigatum in those situations. So be careful with a couple of those grasses. Just keep in mind that aggressiveness does not help your diversity. If you put something in there, oh, I want something that kind of covers this area quickly, that's fine, but it's at some loss of something else. So you want to keep diversity. Watch your aggressiveness on something, and mostly when I say aggressiveness, it's going to be by seed. There's some plants that will do it vegetatively, And this is an outstanding grass. I've used it on green roofs. And I've also looked at those green roofs like the Franklin Police Department that we did a few years ago. Almost nothing but muley grass right now because it receded and it was also a vegetative spread. And I still haven't figured out what is the appeal about this grass anyway. It's about a month out of the year that it's looking beautiful and pink and those pink clouds. But the rest of the year, unlike the other warm season grasses, there's not much to it. That swaying in the breeze that I talk about with a lot of these little blue stems and some of the other grasses, I don't see that with the pink muley. But anyway, it's very aggressive in a cultivated pocket prairie. And you know what? This is my number one pollinator plant. No doubt about it. My number one pollinator. However, and some of you that have put pycnanthemum species and mountain mint in your cultivated bed, you about it spreads vegetatively. Doesn't do it by the seed, but it spreads vegetatively. And there's not much else that is happening in around that plant. You look at that. That is one solid mass of mountain mint. And I think this is pycnanthemum incana. We have several different species that occurs around us, but I love it. I love this plant. I'm cautious about where I use it. And if I'm putting it in a cultivated bed that I don't want it to spread and outcompete with other native species, I'm careful. This is a crazy aster for me. The willow leaf aster. If any of you have grown this before, you know exactly what I'm going to say about it. It is without a doubt, the latest blooming wildflower I grow. And it can go into November. I've seen it around the 1st of December still blooming. It got a couple of frost on it and it was still blooming. And when the monarch's coming through and sometimes it's on 1st of November, it's still flying south. That is the plant. And the bees are going to it. It's an unbelievable pollinator plant, but it is aggressive and it spreads vegetatively like crazy. We are constantly in this one bed that we put this in, a bit of a pocket prairie. We are constantly removing the suckers from it. So you got to weigh this out. Is that, okay, I love that plant. Okay, at what price? You're going to put that in. And, and like I said, not all natives fit well into a pocket prairie. I did a butterfly garden for a lady. It was massive. It was huge, and they had a driveway actually went through it in West Nashville, and we tried to figure out a way to put what, according to Rita Venable, the Tennessee butterfly lady, in her book, and she says, if you want the best monarch caterpillar food, you're going to use the Syriaca, the common milkweed. It has the highest toxicity of the toxin that makes them undesirable to the birds. It has, look at the leaf surface area of that. It's not hairy like the Asclepias tuberosa, the butterfly weed. It's just a no-brainer. If I'm a monarch caterpillar, this is what I want to do. This is my buffet. But it's so aggressive. And even in natural areas where I've seen it occur, it can outcompete a lot of the other prairie plants around it. We tried to take this plant and treat it like a mint and sink it into a black plastic pot, bury that pot down in the ground with about 2 to 3 inches of a lip above to keep it from suckering out. No way. It kept doing it. So this is a great monarch food butterfly plant, and if you ever get to catch that in bloom, they're fragrant. It's an outstanding plant somewhere else. Would I put it in a pocket prairie? No. All right, so here, that was the good, the bad and the ugly. Let's talk about some good stuff, that I've used over the years. It can't go wrong with the wild bergamot, the Monarda fistulosa. And yeah, it spreads a little bit, but not aggressive enough to outcompete some of the other plants. In my naturally occurring prairies that I have here on the land, we have 127 acres here. And in the prairies where they are occurring, they're out in full sun growing right next to those warm season grasses, little blue stem and big blue stem, and the Sagastrum nutans. So great plant, great pollinator plant, great food plant. Probably the most ubiquitous wildflower. You know, when the big chain box stores start carrying a native, you know that people are getting excited, with that. And purple coneflower it's becoming almost too common. I ask this question a lot from a lot of people, and probably every one of us has had purple coneflower in our yard that we bought from somebody. Have you ever seen where Echinacea purpurea naturally occurs? Well, it occurs on our land, and we are on the western highland rim, western escarpment of the highland rim, and we have the highs and lows. Up on your nursery is up on the ridge, and then we have creeks down below, and we have a moist meadow that Dr. Dwayne Estes is all excited about in his grasslands. And we look at that. Those purple coneflowers are down below. They are not naturally occurring up on the ridges in the high, dry prairies. They like moisture. Okay, so if you're going to put a coneflower in your dry pocket prairie, probably not purpurea. There's simulata, which is the a prairie coneflower that occurs in some of the prairies north up and above Clarksville, and then Tennessee coneflower. Just keep in mind that Tennessee coneflower, outstanding plant, one of my favorite green roof plants to use is the Tennessee coneflower. But keep in mind that it's not going to be cone shaped. It's going to be reflexed up, and it's always facing the east. And I cannot find one botanist, and I know a lot of those guys. I cannot find one botanist that can tell me why that is. Tennessee coneflower, reflexed up, faces east, does not turn with the sun like a sunflower, only occurs naturally east southeast of Nashville in the Cedar Glades. So it truly is a homeboy for us. I love using it in a pocket prairie, but I'm also very aware of what side the sun is rising. You can't go wrong with the blue stems. They're not that aggressive. I wish they were a little more aggressive. In our natural prairies, we have little blue stem and big blue stem. And another name for the big blue stem is turkeyfoot. And if you see up there in the top left-hand corner, you start to see the seed head start to pop up, and it puts out three like a turkeyfoot. So some people call it turkeyfoot. And you can get up, 7 feet tall with that very easily. But beautiful color. And that movement I'm talking about in the winter, this is the one. But when you have that coloration in it, and even if it starts to fade a little bit, still has some beautiful color to it. But it's the movement in the dead of the winter that we get. That's an excellent pocket prairie plant, as well as the little blue stem. This is one that I've tried, experimented with a lot, because it's been more of a wetland type species where I see it naturally occur, is the bushy blue stem, the Anthropogon glomeratus. So, you could say bushy blue stem. It's more of a bushy broom sedge. Now, let's talk about that for a moment. I have used broom sedge, Andropogon virginicus, in a pocket prairie. One of the things I learned about the broom sedge, the common broom sedge, is that it's short-lived. And whenever something is short-lived like that, and you get just a few years out of, you better believe it reseeds itself. That's why you see it in those waste areas, disturbed areas, is that it reseeded itself in there very quickly, and then it will keep continuing reseeding itself. So I'm cautious with that. The bushy blue stem, the glomeratus, is not like that. And I think it's because we took a plant that typically would like a little bit more moisture, and we put it in a drier site. But that plume, that bushiness that it has is just beautiful. And of course, the butterfly weed, we talked about that. And the split beard blue stem, definitely would use that. It's a broom sedge wannabe, but does not reseed itself as aggressively as the broom sedge. Split beard, and here's the other thing too. If you ever get a chance to view a prairie like the one they have on Arnold Air Force Base, 350-acre prairie, and pre 9/11, we actually did some work there for a local state park, and we were allowed to go into this restricted airfield, and they locked us in it to collect seed off of some of the native flora there. in the prairie and reintroduce it at a state park close by. There was a silver white band that went through the middle of that prairie, and it was this Andropogon tenareus. It truly is a wider bloom to it, wider plumage. The seed heads are wider compared to a lot of the other grasses. Not as tall. In fact, there's some selections out there called Black Mountain that they found in North Carolina where it's not as tall, it's actually shorter. Works very well in some of your short grass pipe prairies. There's not a Leactris I wouldn't use. Spicata is probably the most common. That's the one you can find, the seed on. You can find plugs of it. Some of the we grow about 9 different species of the blazing stars, from all the way from East Texas, Louisiana, the Gulf Coast, all the way up into Kansas. There actually is a Kansas gay feather that's out there. That's a Leactris. I love them all because of when they bloom, which is kind of a late summer. You kind of look at the coneflower and say, okay, I'm kind of done with that. And some of your phlox, they kind of look tired. And then the Leactris comes in. So now you can customize the height of your pocket prairie by which species you use. The spicata is the tallest one we have, and then the button blazing star, which is Leactris aspera, is the next tallest. And 2 completely different looking blooms. Either one, the butterflies go crazy over it, pollinators go nuts over it. There's the thing about filler plants, and we're talking more about this. And Claudia West, I believe she gave a talk one time down in Chattanooga years ago about how we're using sedges. There's, according to Dwayne Estes, there's about 300 species of those sedges out floating around out there for us to use. Sedges are great. I like using a lot of different things as filler. These are plants that may not survive after about 10 years, but they come in, they're kind of like your party. I love using all the ryegrasses. Elemus just happened to be one of them that I had the photo of the bottlebrush grass, but it's a cool season grass, and it's going to be actively growing when a lot of your warm season grasses are not. And you can plant that, you can actually reseed that in and let that fill in. And then as your other plants start to mature and fill in, this will fade away. And on the sedges, sure, Carex mustigensis. I love using the palm sedge as a filler plant, as well as the other. This might be my favorite because it has a lot of sun and heat tolerance with that. All right. Briefly, we'll talk about the planting time. And big question is to till or not to till. Larry Weiner talked about this from Pennsylvania. I've had a big discussion about it, is that, every time you go to pull a weed, you're disturbing the ground. And what happens? You release a whole new seed bank. If you're going to till, you're going to release a seed bank. So especially in suburbia, when you've got a crazy seed bank underneath that grass, and maybe we did remove it by side cutting, but you've got a seed bank there. Okay, so I'm apt to not till it unless it's just horrendous soil. If we get a lot of clay, maybe add some soil to that to till in, but I prefer to hold the plants back. If you are using some kind of a soil amendment, you're going to have plants grow too fast. They're going to flop. Here we go again. They may survive, but not perform. So with that said, I don't till. I prefer not to till. I prefer not to stir the soil any more than removing the sod. But, if we're doing the big, prairies, we do this, and, we'll disc that because we want it to flush, and we'll kill it again. So every time that we'll do something like this, we get a whole new seed. This is where I learned about the seed bank scenario because of doing these big, massive prairies. Disturbance equals weeds. There we go. This was a pocket prairie we did in Burns, Tennessee, close to Montgomery Bell State Park. Has a few non-natives along the sidewalk there. They wanted some creeping thyme, but the rest of that are native species. And what you see, most of the green in there is not native. And it just came in because they were out there pulling the weeds. The more the weeds they pull, the more they release this annual We'll talk about that, what that is in just a moment. Yellow nutsedge, gosh, what a scourge. I mean, I've had it on green roofs. I've had it in so many different scenarios where it just took over. You know, there are actually selective herbicides that work on yellow nutsedge, where the straight glyphosate may not work on it. You know, the European violet, especially if you got a little shady, moist area, that tend to creep in. But this is my bad one. Fatula villosa, mulberry weed. I remember 20 years ago when Dr. Dwayne S. was in my nursery for a native plant festival. He was leading a wildflower, and he picked up a plant out of the area. He says, Mike, and I've never heard this man say this before, Mike, I don't know what this is. And he took it back to Austin P and figured out that it was an invasive non-native annual. Next thing you know, the world's covered in it. So fatula, and you probably know, you probably see it down around Chattanooga. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We start painting out areas that we want to plant these in and try to give us an idea of where we want our color to be, where our is are. We'll place them out. You see that opening there, you see the line. We'll plant these 2 to 3 feet apart. We're starting to tighten this up. This is a couple of years ago. We're starting to tighten this up a little bit now to prevent some of the weed problems. So we may go 1 to 2 feet apart, maybe averaging around 18 inches. Right there on the foreground, that's a 3-gallon prairie drop seed. There's a smaller one that we have placed in. And one of the big things I'd like for everybody to have is you're going to do a pocket prairie. If it's large enough to do it, walk through it, put a trail through it, get it where you can go into the middle of it and experience a big blue stem towering up above your head, or the fragrance of a phlox. So put a walk through, you know, and if Dwayne Esses can have his one day, his utopia up there at Southeastern Grasslands Initiative, they're going to have a walkthrough prairie there on the side of that building. This is at Austin P State University. They put a meadow in, and they put a dry creek bed in that's also part of a walkthrough. This is the pocket prairie that I showed earlier that had a lot of turf grass in it, a lot of Bermuda. This is the winter look, and you can see, okay, it looks a lot better now. There were some photos that the client sent me today, in fact, and it's full, it's wall-to-wall plant material. She did put a helianthus in there that we grow several of the sunflowers, one of them verticillatus, which is a fairly endangered species. And just because it's a fairly protected plant doesn't mean it's weak. It's a strong grower. It did not reseed itself, and that may be one of the issues, but it sure did get big. And you can see the coneflower heads there. This is another one that we did. We put a lot of grass in this. The more grasses we put in, the more the client liked it, especially with the stone wall in the background. Okay, very quickly with the maintenance. Some of it's obvious, weed control, especially the first year. Please do not feed it. If you put fertilizer in a pocket prairie, you know, you're not going to kill it, okay? But it becomes a big giant ground cover because all the grasses are going to be horizontal and not vertical. Deadheading. A lot of people say, well, I don't know, Mike. The goldfish love seed heads, the echinaceas and the coneflowers and the sunflowers, and I don't know, and the monardas, I don't know, But what that is that's birth for the plant. And what you want is the roots, all the energy to go into rooting out into seed production. So deadhead, if you can do it. But that winter interest, look, we'll save it for later. Okay. So in a couple of years from now, don't worry about the deadheading. You get a quickly established pocket prairie. This is one we did with a little bit more form. This has reseeded itself in some other areas and stretched out. So it's got that more of a prairie look, but we went in with some crazy things like Culver's root, some selections of little blue stem, a lot of beard tongue. I love using penstemons in the pocket prairies. They're just tough as nails. This is at Cincinnati Zoo. They had a little pocket prairie there, and they just kind of let it go. And it's not unattractive for, you know, the fall winter look there. All right, very briefly, closing out. If you don't know about us up here, we've been here for 25 years. I'd like to say that I started when I was 16, but that is not true. We are by appointment only. Please call and let us know that you're coming. A lot of you guys, Bill, I know for sure, Mark Fraley has been there. Please pay us a visit. We are known for some of our collections. We do have an endangered species permit with the state of Tennessee to grow federally endangered species. My favorite, hands down, is Daily foliosa, the leafy prairie clover, and that's federally and it's just an outstanding performer. On our trees, we have the largest collection of oaks. We're around 32 species of oaks. A lot of them are, we dip down into the deep south in the Piedmont area. A live oak, we're growing that, doing great for us now. But, you know, listen to Doug Tallamy talk about the oaks. We need more of the oaks. I grow an oak called running oak, Quercus pumila, and it only gets about 3 feet tall. It's a shrub. And yes, speaking of Doug, we're a homegrown national park, and we truly believe in what he is preaching to everybody, and we're going to try to practice it as much as possible. And with that said, I just about get an hour. You know, do a little Q&A.
Yes, Mike, thank you so much for being with us today. We certainly appreciate it and appreciate you sharing all the work that you've done over the years with native plants, so you can give us a lot of information. We had a couple of questions in the chat that I'll go back to. What do you recommend using for chemical applications when that's needed?
Yeah, and like I said, I'm very cautious using it. So we're fortunate to have up here in Nashville invasive plant control. It's a private business, commercial business, where they, Steve Manning and Lee Patrick, and they go all over the United States and sometimes overseas to do invasive plant eradication. And when it comes down to what we as a homeowner can use, a little different than what they use. You know, I'm still believing that systemics are the best way to go, because I still don't have the proof, and I've been using it for decades of any soil residual. So that's the glyphosates. You know, Roundup, I don't like to call it Roundup, it's glyphosate. So I'll go to a local farmer's co-op and get Cornerstone, and I will dilute it to a point where it may take a little bit longer, but I get a more thorough kill. I don't have any residual. I try not to use, unless it's a large scale, I try not to use much on pre-emergent because that will affect the seed. But in a bed where I am going to put in plants, you know, live plants, I may use a pre-emergent in with that. And just see what's available. You know, the EPA is really, and rightly so, is really chomping down on a lot of the herbicides now. I think it was a great thing they did with the insecticides. You know, it wasn't that long ago we were using systemic insecticides, and we know what that was going to do. It was killing the pollinators like crazy. So I use the glyphosate as my go-to most of the time. Yeah.
Mike, I'm going to stop sharing your screen, just make sure everybody can see you. And we've asked people to turn on their videos so that when they ask questions, you can see them. And then the other question that was in chat was the 10 species for 20 feet. Is that 20 square feet?
It's a 20 feet linear. Okay. So okay. If I'm stretching it out, I'm doing, say it's a 4 or 5 feet wide, 20 feet. So that would be more of 100, say 100 square feet. So 20 linear feet or 100 square feet, 10 species.
All right. So now let's see. got one coming in. How much sun does big blue stem need? I have a half-acre riparian meadow, which does flood in the spring, but the big blue on the higher ground flops each October. Indian grass too.
So look at your shade with that. You know, if it's flopping, it's not just the sun. If your soil is very rich, that may be an issue as well. That's why I say stay away from the fertilizers. You don't need to do that with these native plants anyway. One of the things I didn't mention that we do when we do plant live plants in our pocket prairies, we try to inoculate it with a mycorrhiza, and try to simulate what the natural grasslands would have is a healthy fungi community, fungus community. And, you know, we use a commercial mycorrhiza that has humic acid in it, a lot of the organics that kind of jump starts the roots. But if you have a healthy mycorrhiza, you don't need fertilizer, inorganic fertilizers anyway, because that's allowing the most optimum uptake of the natural mineral and organic food for the plant. So, but the flopping is a lot of times it comes from just having too rich a soil. What do you do about that? I mean, you're not going to go in and remove all the soil. So if you're getting flopping on the big blue, I actually have big blue in some semi-shady areas where it's naturally occurring in my meadow. And it's standing up pretty good. So I would guess that it's probably going to be more of the soil. And then the other thing too is make sure you got plants growing around it that helps them support themselves.
That's what I was going to say, that just like a cornfield or anything else, that if you have big blue stem, it'll flop on the edges, but in the middle, it supports itself.
Right.
And also, if you, on the mycorrhizum, if you do take that black plastic and cook it all summer long,
You're going to kill,
you're going to kill all sorts of things. So
right.
you really need to consider some kind of way to add that back, whether it's a compost that's rich in it or a solution.
Yep.
Yeah, I have to say one of my favorite combinations, I have a western facing bank, and at the top of it in the hot, dry, fun sun, I have the giant coneflower, blue stem, and cup plant together, and they just take care of each other and make this nice, beautiful wall. All right, does anybody else have questions for Mike? I'm sure I have a dozen, but I will let other people ask.
Oh, I have a question. On a lot of the pocket prairies you showed, the plants weren't very dense. Do you seed in to make a denser meadow, or do you is that kind of the final state?
No, that's far from being the final state. That's where the filler plants come in. I try to fill in. I've been using here lately more phlox pilosa, which is called prairie phlox. I've been using that because you may get a foot tall out of that. And it's such an early bloomer. And, all I'm really doing is plagiarizing what I see out in the wild and Mother Nature. And, the original landscaper had it going on. So I look at where the phlox pilosa occurs, and it's occurring around what would later be some tall grass. And the coneflowers and some of the phlox paniculatas. So I've been using that as more of a filler. So what you see is not a done deal. I will fill in, and I try to do that with plugs. Makes it a little easier to get around the 1 gallons and 3 gallons.
The phlox pilosa, is that the one that they call
Downy phlox? Or
yeah,
prairie?
downy. Mm-hmm.
I have a question, Mike. We put in a meadow, a small meadow, a little over a year ago, and it's mostly seeded with blue stem, side oats grama, and some rudbeckia, right now the New England aster is blooming. So about, 5 or 6 different flowers. Now, the advice that was given to me was to mow it only once a year in the spring, like early spring, um, to maybe 3 inches tall. Do you agree with that?
That's interesting, because if I am mimicking, if I am copying what I see out in the wild, unless lightning struck this field and burned it down, it's up and up. And, in March, we're looking at a lot of dead, dying leaf, a lot of foliage, and so it's kind of, it's like, all right, well, I'm really doing it the way that it's been done for thousands of years. I'm not mowing it. And like I mentioned, I love burning our big prairies every 3 years, but I do bush hog those in the interim. What I will do is leave up little islands, almost look like a crop sculptures, from above, for habitat. We've got bobwhite all around us, and we do leave some up for habitat. But it's what I hope to happen if I get a good reseeding on the prairies, then when that sun hits that soil, especially after you burn, it's just amazing what happens, because you got that ash and pretty much bare ground. The sun hits that, warms it up quickly, a quick germination of the seed that just dropped off of those plants that you just burned down. So mowing is not a bad idea. I would make sure you're not doing it too, so that there's still some food. The seed heads on some of those grasses may still be around in February. So yeah, I think mowing is not 3 inches. I wouldn't go any lower than that. But and making sure, what I would do if to really help you get it established, collect seed off of those, hold them in the refrigerator and dry, and then after you mow it, sow the seed back in. Just broadcast it. I've done that many times here, trying to get some forbs reestablished. Let me mention, by the way, the reason that we went from an annual or 2-year burn on our prairies into a 3-year burn is that the grasses loved it too much, the forbs did not. So we started seeing some collateral damage on the monardas, some of the asters, the coneflowers, things like that. And something that liked it too much are a lot of the legumes. And of course, native legumes, but the one bad boy is the Lespedeza sericea, the Asian bush clover. And that is probably that and Johnson grass is my biggest scourge right now of our prairies. So, cutting it a lot of times helps doing that, but you better believe you're going to have a seed drop from that Lespedeza also. I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
Karen.
thank you. That's great.
All right, Diane's asking, she says, I have a ton of perilla. To not disturb the soil, do you recommend cutting at the base or using another means of removal? It comes up easily when pulled, but also comes up with a lot of soil.
Perilla is, and it stinks to high heaven. It's an annual, and if you can cut it before it sets seed, you're going to do away with it. I actually did an experiment out on our land in a woodland area years ago, where I came in and weed eated Microstegium staminium, the Japanese stilt grass, and it was solid. And where trilliums and Virginia bluebells and ferns should be, it was solid of this Japanese stilt grass. And I came in, I watched it when it was going to go in flower, and because it was an annual, I kept it from going to flower, so therefore it didn't go to seed. Now, the one thing about the Japanese stilt grass, like so many other invasive non-native animals, is that you get a seed bank like crazy anyway. So it took time to get that established, but I would cut an annual. Perennials, won't do you any good, but cutting an annual, and perilla is an annual. It's the one thing about perilla is that of all the invasive non-natives that I see all around, it's, to me, one of the easiest to control. So cut, and I think it's probably in seed right now.
Thanks. All right, does anybody else have questions?
Hi, Mike. I have two questions actually, but one of them is similar to also weed control. I have the snail seed weed, which is a vine. Snail seed vine.
Cocculus. All right, where's our botanist in here now? Yeah, but it's a native vine. You talk about that has the red berries, and it has the snail shell seed inside that looks like a snail shell. It is native, and it's in your. You have it in your.
It grows rampant in 2 or 3 of my beds, just covering everything. And I've been pulling it up, like trying to yank up the roots. I'll get roots after roots after roots, but I'm definitely opening up that seed bed by doing that. So, but I can't seem to keep it off of strangling things.
You know, it's funny that vine, as pretty as it is, and I'm cognizant of the fact that it is a beautiful native vine, but it seems like it likes disturbed areas more than, I'll see it in a back lot in urban suburbia in East Nashville, where not many other things aside of Japanese honeysuckle is growing. So, I think it has its place. I don't know about a cultivated bed. I wouldn't have it there because it is aggressive. It's a beautiful, if there's a lot of great vines out there that native, that has some great berries to it. You just be very careful which ones you use that has some berries. I think, to me, Virginia creeper, when it's in berry and it's in fruit, is amazing. And you look at the fat content, the protein that's in those berries, and why the migratory birds are going to it this time of the year. So there's a lot of great vines out there that has berry production. The cocculus, I'm very cautious. Cocculus coccinea, I believe is the name on it. I saw John Mannion's name on there. He's the one I probably should go to, ask him if that's the right name. I would get rid of it, Angela.
I'm trying to. I'm just hoping to find tricks on how to do it without using spray, or that's what I've been trying to do.
If you go in, the more you disturb the soil, the more you release the seed bank. What we will do is take some old loppers or pruners and go down below the crown and actually cut it. A lot of times that will kill the plant without the roots coming back on it. And I've tried that with several plants before, native and non-native, and that seems to work. And you're getting very little disturbance with those blades of the pruners.
Okay, thank you. My other question had to do with just kind of stepping back into the lecture, your talk, where you talked about deadheading for the first couple of years at least, as a way to, was that just for clarity, was that for encouraging the root systems to grow deeper, or just
right? We want to get that. That's correct. Yeah, we want to get those new young plants established as quickly as possible so that you can back away from it. And seed production is childbirth for that plant, and all the energy goes into seed production. There's been times where I could not get a woody shrub or tree well established because it happened to be in fruit. And there was nothing happening, no energy going down, all the energy was going up to the nut production. So by deadheading and really the first year is all you should have. You have to do that. And it hurts because you've just put this thing in, you've gone through a growing season maybe of this last summer, and here comes fall, and wow, look at what has happened, look what I did and everything. Oh, I got to cut all those seed heads off of there. To me, and Pete Aldoff, said it best in his documentary about over in Holland and his garden over there. He loves our native grasses and he loves our native bergamots, the monardas. And it's a winter interest plant with that gold shaped seed head on the Monardas. But no, that's going up instead of going down. So I highly recommend cutting the seed heads, at least for the first year. Anytime you see seed production right after flowering, you see seed production, go ahead and cut that off, deadhead it.
Angela, I'd recommend doing that on your cut plant, even as they're after maturity.
On my cut plant,
Cup plant. Yeah, the
it
cup plant.
died. It didn't make it. It didn't even make it past, like it just, I got it in the ground and it shriveled up.
It
Not
may
like
come back on you.
That's impressive. It's really hard to kill a cup plant,
I know. I have about 10,000 I'll give you.
but they're very harmless. You just mow them
Yeah.
down or pull them out, or give them to Angela.
Yes.
That's right. How far I could take that reputation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Mike, I'm curious about GroWild's plugs. What how many different species do you do in plugs?
Oh gosh.
Haha.
Well, of course, we are mostly producing plugs for our 1 gallons and above. We don't do, of course, we're not mail order. And only if it's large projects, you know, where you're talking about thousands of plants, will we mention even do it. If it's a smaller suburban type planting, we prefer to do the gallons. It's just, you got a better survival rate with them. And again, your window of planting, you know, right now, I'm not planting plugs. I'm planting gallons and 3-gallon herbaceous plants. And, you know, so the plugs have got a smaller window of planting time and the survivability. So we don't do as much. We will grow them up and propagate those into for us to have the 1 gallons. If it's a large project, we'll try to work it out with the client and say, okay, well, we'll do that. We do contract growing. And we've done a lot more of that. We did, in fact, down at below Chattanooga years ago, we did a contract growing with the Department of Defense on the Scutellaria montana, the showy skull count. That right there around Dalton, Georgia. And, you know, we got up to around 400 plants on that. You know, you can't always predict really on some of these rare plants how well they're going to do from propagation. We worked, had a deal with TVA and growing in some endangered species for their right-of-ways, doing the same thing. That's when we'll talk about plugs. But now, if you want to, you get with Isel Plants, they're up around Washington, D.C. Claudio Vasquez has a great operation there where you can order in flats of plugs. And that's a great way to go. I have to say, you know, if I had a business that did nothing but plugs, you know, I'm not sure, you know, because I don't get 1 gallons. I mean, my 1 gallons are just so much more substantial. I've got roots coming out the bottom of the pots of the 1 gallon containers. And then you also look at storing. If we have a flat, and we had this situation with some Joe Pye weed, we just got so busy this year. And I mentioned it, I think, to Bill not too long ago, but our record year that we've had in 25 years was during the year of COVID. And because everybody was staying home and gardening or remodeling a kitchen or something, but and it caught us all by surprise in the horticultural industry. So we were rushing to get things done, and along the same lines, you know, we're trying to stay in-house production and propagation as much as we possibly can, and not buy from outside source. We had some Joe Pye weed that we had a few flats, several hundred of, and we could not get them potted up within a week of them being ready, and they died because, you know, those black plastic plug trays have just so much, they're limited on, you know. So if you're going to deal with plugs, make sure you get, if you get the plugs in, and IZL is just an excellent source for getting them in.
Mhm.
Make sure you're ready to plant those. Don't have them sitting around. You know, here we are, a nursery, and you think that we would be better at storing plants, but
Well, that's not always the case when you have to tend to them all. So that is a lot of work. For those of you who are curious about IZL, you can pick the nursery that is closest to you that carries the plugs you're looking for. If you're looking at plugs, they don't do split trace like companies like Prairie or Prairie Moon, but if you want a lot of a plant, you can look at their plug list and then pick the nursery that's closest to you, which is helpful if you're looking for your, as close to local eco type as possible.
yep.
Yeah, so that's a cool one. But yeah, it's good to know that if you do have a super large project and you want to contract out, do some contract growing, that you guys do that. All right, anybody else have questions? We're at about 7:20. So if we have another question or two, and then we'll wrap up. All right. It sounds like everybody has got their questions out. So Mike, I just want to say thank you again. I like hearing all your stories and hearing about all the things that you guys are doing. And we really appreciate you taking time out tonight to talk to us all.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And Bill, thank you for
Yeah,
asking me to come on. So, and
absolutely. Yes. We're
we'll
always happy
talk
to have you
again.
come around and talk.
Thanks a
Oh,
lot
hey,
for taking your time tonight.
yeah. Looks like we do get one more question in. Any idea how much invasive plant control would charge to clear an acre of Bermuda in winter weeds like speedwell?
I don't know. Call Steve Manning at IPC and ask him. He's a super nice guy. He happens to be a client of mine as well. And he and I have done some big projects together where, it makes sense. If you're going to go in and clear out acres of bush honeysuckle, you better come in with something native real quick because bush honeysuckle will come back. We did this a couple of the local parks around Nashville. But I just call IPC. I'm not sure I can answer that question, even though I've done work with him. I'm not sure what he charges for acre. He can let you know. He's booked. I will tell you that. And I used to serve on the Tennessee Invasive Plant Council for about 9 years, and serving on that council in the state of Tennessee, it was really eye-opening and how dangerous some of these invasive non-native plants. We can't say invasive exotic anymore. It's not, we don't do that, but it's invasive non-native species, how dangerous some of them are, and how we're seeing new ones coming up from the south because our winters are allowing that to happen more now. So, Kogon grass, I remember in the garden center, years ago, we sold red barren Japanese bloodgrass. Well, that's Kogon grass that is coming in out of West Tennessee. And a lot of the soybean farmers out in West Tennessee are scared to death of it because how aggressive it is and how fire likes it so much. So call Steve Manning at Invasive Plant Control, see what he says.
Thanks, Mike, for indulging that. We appreciate it.
Just another story.
Yeah, it's great. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you again.
Thanks
Join
so
us for our November meeting, and for our members, we have an annual meeting coming up at the beginning of November as well. So thank you all. Have a good night.
All right. See y'all. Bye, Bull.